Hello, and welcome to this very special webinar on King and Christophe, Haiti. The title of it is The Vessel of Independence Must Save Itself, the Political Imagination of King Henri Christophe. My name is Mike Moise, and I'm a board member of the Louverture Cultural Society, Inc., LCS. I'm delighted that you've joined us for this event this afternoon or mornings, depending on wherever you are joining us from in the world. A very warm welcome to you to LCS's webinar on King Henri of Haiti. I am very honored and humbled to be joined today by our guest speaker, Dr. Nathalie Frédéric Pierre. She's an expert on King Henri Christophe, and also we have a very special guest, Miss Harmony Divine, who will be singing for us after the presentation and the Q&A session. If you would indulge me for a minute, at this time, I would like to briefly tell you about our organization, the Louverture Cultural Society. Please, if you are not... LCS, who we are. The organization started back in May of this year by 7 members of the Haitian community. What is our mission? Our mission is to promote Haitian history, culture, customs, as well as providing an opportunity for networking through educational and social cultural activities. This webinar is exactly why we created this organization. So that way we could provide a well-qualified webinars and programs that would educate and help enrich members of our community. At this time, what I would like to do is, and if at this point, if you have any questions about organization, I would like for you to send us an email at info@louverturecs.org. I would like to briefly, at this point, tell you about our board members. This organization is run by 7 board members. I am one of the board members, Dr. Jean-Claude Ditesse, who is the moderator for the event this afternoon, Dr. Guylaine Richard, Mr. Franz Richard, Dr. Marie-Ignace G. Morel, Ms. Cozy Claire G. Joseph, and Ms. Jocelyn Camo. We want to thank them for all their hard work to this organization. They've spent not only their resources to get this organization launched, but also countless hours to ensure that we provide quality programs to our members. At this point, I would also be remiss if I would not thank each and every of our members who have generously donated their resources to this organization and made this event possible for us. At this point, what I would like to do is introduce our moderator, who is one of our board members, Dr. Jean-Claude Ditesse. Dr. Jean-Claude Ditesse, a brief bio of Dr. Ditesse. Dr. Ditesse is a retired faculty member and former head of the neuropsychology section at the College of Osteopathic Medicine at Michigan State University. He's a licensed psychologist in Florida and Michigan, and he has more than 35 years of clinical experience in the fields of clinical, cross-cultural rehabilitation, and neuropsychology. His second retirement occurred recently after serving as a cross-cultural consultant at the Lou and Murray and Wellness Center at the College of Nursing at Florida State University. Dr. Ditesse has published in his field and has volunteered his professional services to the Haitian community here and in Haiti. He described himself as a student of history and believing that a healthy and cultural identity to encounter negative stereotypes is a strong foundation for healthy self-esteem in immigrants. He helped to found the Louverture Cultural Society to promote Haitian history and culture in Florida. Dr. Dutesse is the editor of Louverture, our quarterly newsletter, and also Zami Detroit, another newsletter, and is also devoted to Haitian history and culture. Dr. Dutesse, welcome, sir, and please take it away.
Thank you, Mike, for this wonderful introduction. Greetings to all, and thank you for your participation in our first webinar. Before proceeding any further, I would like to invite you to join me in taking 15 seconds of silence in homage to our founding fathers and founding mothers, after which we will play the Dessalinian. Thank you for your cooperation. This event is as much a celebration of the anniversary of Henri Christophe's birth on October 6th, as it is a commemoration of the 200th anniversary of his death on October 8th, 1820, and a time for both mourning and reflection on his legacy. The month of October is full of painful memories for the children and true friends of Haiti. Through internecine conflict, we lost the Emperor, Jean-Jacques Dessalines Ier, Bois Tonnerre, Charles d'Embarcadère, Joseph Capois ou Capois la Mort, Germain Frère, Pompée Valentin, Baron de Vasté, the children of King Henry and King Henry himself, and many others. Clearly, a time for mourning. Clearly, a time for reflection.
Okay, I got it.
Great men and great women
Dr. Dutes, you're on mute.
Wow. Oh, sorry.
You are now on mute.
On mute.
Okay.
All right. Did you guys hear me before, or you guys didn't hear me at all?
We can
lost
hear you.
We lost you after Baron de Vaté.
Okay. Actually, I was not after Baron de Vaté. And many others. Clearly, a time for mourning and a time for reflection, a time for growth. Great men and great women, like their undistinguished peers, are not perfect beings, though on many occasions we wish they were. Just as we rejoice at knowing their good deeds, we also cringe and are embarrassed at some of their actions. General Henri Christophe, King Henri Ier, I believe, was a great man. His actions affected the life of people across several continents, and the examination of his life is an opportunity for personal growth, a greater appreciation of the circumstances that gave birth to Haiti, and a better understanding of who we are today as a people and of Haiti as a nation. Knowing about Henri, the orphan boy, bereft of his parents' love and protection at an early age, who became the self-made man, the efficient and honest administrator, the ambitious, scheming, calculating, and ruthless general and king, can be both inspiring and aspirational. Great men and great women are complex human beings. It is not unusual for them to be both admired and despised by their peers, and also future generations. Their deeds, great and small, do not always attract praise, and their vision seldom appreciated during their lifetime. And if anything, many of their actions were controversial. The citadel, which is now admired, was seen by many at Christophe's folly. His court Henry, which you will soon learn about, was castigated as a sign of megalomania by some and admires as a cutting-edge revolutionary economic and social policy by others. The lives and legacies of great men and women offer each generation the opportunity to reflect, to learn and grow from their experience. I believe that to understand Haiti, we must understand Christophe, for within his life, we find all that is best and worst in the Haitian collective self. There is basis for aspirational and transformational change, as well as the seed of destruction for any collective effort at nation building. What would you have done if you were Christophe? Now let's turn to our presenter, who will tell us more about this great man and guide us in our search for information to help get that history, which is pregnant in us, and help us find ways out of the other history we've been taught, that the history that has us trapped, to paraphrase the word of James Baldwin. Dr. Nathalie Frédéric Pierre is a historian of the African diaspora who researches Black political thought during the 19th century. Her dissertation examines the creolization of Western political thought in Haiti after its revolutionary independence. She earned her doctorate in history from New York University, as a BA in history and English from Howard University, and graduated from public school in Brooklyn, New York, where I also went to school after coming from Haiti. In addition to her scholarship, Dr. Pierre volunteers in various Haitian communities. She served as chairwoman of the Flamboyant Haitian Literary Project, an immigrant education advocacy organization that partners with migrant Haitian teens who need support navigating New York City public schools. Committed to her community, recently she and a group of Haitians in Brooklyn decided to raise $27,600 for undocumented Haitian neighbors. Bravo, bravo. Her presentation would explore connections between Henri Christophe migration from Grenada, his involvement in the US and American Revolution, and how his political thinking helped construct a Black kingdom in the Americas. Dr. Frédéric Pierre, we are all yours. Please join me in welcome Dr. Pierre.
Good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon. Thank you so much for that lovely introduction, Dr. Dutesse. And I would be remiss if I didn't acknowledge the presence of Harmony Divine and Tracy Vierge-Lapierre, who are two members who helped me raise the $27,000. So that compliment to me is a compliment to them, and I'm glad that they're here to support me in my presentation today. So I'm just going to start sharing my screen with you all. Let us see. Can you all see my screen? Can I get an audible yes?
Yes.
Thank you so much.
Yes.
Thank you. So again, good afternoon, everyone. I appreciate your attendance. Thank you for having me here at the Louverture Cultural Society's inaugural event. Today, I'll be speaking about new ways of considering the Haitian Revolution and Henri Christophe's pivotal role in that history. So the title of the presentation is on your screen, and we're just going to move right into it because we have a lot of material to cover. Uh-oh. Okay, so as I said, I want us to consider the Haitian Revolution in different ways. And the way to begin doing that is to re-periodize the Haitian Revolution. So I'm just going to leave this on the screen to give you a chance to see what moves I'm trying to make in my scholarship as it relates to the Haitian Revolution. So in the talk, I'll first explore a re-periodization of the Haitian Revolution that helps us understand post-colonial state formation in the early 19th century. I propose an extension of the revolution to 1808, which is well after our Declaration of Independence in 1804. From there, I'll discuss King Henri's approach to governing a population with the etch marks of slavery on their person. Namely, his upliftment of quote unquote moral principles and fatherhood as it relates both to his biological children and in his duties as a father of the Haitian nation. Finally, my goal is to make clear how colonial alliances and imperial wars based in Europe structured the decisions and political thinking of men like Henri the First. So considering colonial alliances and imperial wars, this will also help us understand the challenges that Haitian leaders following Christophe had, and we must keep the broader global context in mind as we consider the difficult choices they made. So the Cliff Notes version of the Haitian history is quite deceptive because we as adults are told to believe that some rebellious slaves got vexed in 1791 and boom, 13 years later, they formed the first Black Republic. This is simply not the case. The previous chart aimed to create crisp categories to analyze the achievements and setbacks experienced by the first generation of Haitians. Now on this chart, I want us to slow down our understanding of the slave revolt. Many historians in my field have pointed out The first people to take up the mantle of the French Revolution were the men of mixed race who wanted to secure their voting rights in order to participate in the benefits of the Haitian Revolution. However, no, excuse me, the French Revolution. However, as these propertied mixed race men are arguing with their French white peers, enslaved people begin hearing stories about the king in France giving them their rights, but the evil landowners, mixed race men, and French planters were denying them those rights. So on this chart, I just wanted to break down the various moments in what it is that I'm calling the first phase of the Haitian Revolution. So I want to point your attention to the first revolt, Port Salut, for those of you who have not been to Haiti. It's actually in the southern part of the country. Our traditional understanding of the Haitian Revolution is the Bois Caïman Congress, which is the third item on my chart on the PowerPoint. I want to point this little discretion out because as we begin to understand Christophe's reign, we need to understand the different politics of the various regions of Saint-Domingue during the revolution. So the Haitian Revolution, in fact, begins in the southern part of the country with the Port Salut revolts. And it is followed up soon after with the mixed race men getting the right to citizenship, getting the right to vote, getting the right to determine the fate of the island. So as France is having its revolution, we see that the British occupy Saint-Domingue. I will just gloss over this final bit to point out that Toussaint Louverture and Sontonax, they issued their emancipation decrees at the same exact time in August. And when we're thinking about Haitian freedom, we must always go to the 1793 date as opposed to the February 1794 date, which is when France abolishes slavery across its empire in order to secure the military service of formerly enslaved people. Let's be clear at this point. The French do not abolish slavery because of humanitarian conditions. They abolished slavery because they needed the military power of the generals who were working in Haiti, well, in what becomes Haiti, in Martinique, in Guadeloupe. But it is the efforts of our ancestors in Haiti that provokes this conclusion of conscripting Black men into the military in exchange for their freedom. So this is one concrete way. My apologies. This is one concrete way of looking at how the efforts of our ancestors had a direct connection about what's going on, both in the Caribbean and in France itself. I only want to highlight one other piece of information on this slide, and that is what I'm calling the first Haitian Civil War between Louverture and Rigaud. This becomes especially important when we're looking at the early years of Christophe's reign, where he goes to civil war with the former partisans of Rigaud, who have realigned themselves with one of Rigaud's mentees, Alexandre Pétion. So this is the second phase of the Haitian Revolution. And I note that Louverture's kidnapping and exile in France is the end of this moment. This is the Black Jacobin period of the Haitian Revolution, and it extends outside of the borders of what we now call Haiti. So this is the third phase of the Haitian Revolution. And I want to give you a little bit of time to digest all of the material that's on the page, because I will not meditate on each of these points. But as it relates to Christophe, we need to go to June 1802, where I have written war within a war. So during this time period, Toussaint is no longer on the island. There is a power vacuum among the quote unquote Black Jacobins. The way that our Haitian ancestors decided to resolve that issue was to neutralize the African-born generals who refused who refuse to realign themselves with France after Louverture is kidnapped and exiled. As it relates to Christophe, you'll notice that I point out the name of the Congolese colonel Jean-Baptiste Sans Souci. One of the theories that Haitian anthropologists, one of the arguments that Haitian anthropologist Michel Roth-Trio presents is that Palais Sans Souci, yes, it might be in reference to a European kingdom that had a palace named Sans Souci, but it actually might also be a bit of a slight against this African-born general who caused the Creole-born generals a lot of static drama. And when I say Creole-born, in the 19th century and the 18th century, Creole-born simply means a person who was born somewhere on the American continent. So you could be born in Canada and you're considered Creole. You could be born in Peru and you're considered Creole. But as it relates to Christophe's kingdom, we need to always amplify this point that there is this tension brewing between the African majority and the American majority that becomes the leaders of independent Haiti. Okay, so all of these details, I'm pretty sure that some of these details we're all very familiar with. I point out this concept of canine warfare in that Rochambeau, in October 1802, he decides to bring in dogs into the fight. And it is at that moment that some scholars have argued that the mixed race generals who are fighting in the Haitian Revolution finally realize that their former French family members view them in the same racial category as the formerly enslaved Africans. So there are accounts of future President Boyer observing a fellow mixed race general being devoured by dogs, and that radicalizes the elites from mixed race families into realizing that we are all, in fact, on board this vessel of independence, as Christophe calls it. So this is phase 4 of the Haitian Revolution, and this is where the story of the revolution typically stops. But I encourage you all to think of it as a next phase of the revolution that really helps us understand some of the political instability that's caused both by internal factions and the imperial war waging between France and Britain. So as we all know, January 1st, 1804, the Declaration of Independence is announced. What is typically not announced is there was a rogue French general who was based in what we now call Saint-Domingue, and he universally says, I reject Haitian independence, and I am going to govern in what is now Saint-Domingue until 1808. Now, for Dessalines, this is a major issue because when he fought under Louverture's army, they had claimed Saint-Domingue as, yes, oh gosh, it's so silly. It's the same word in both languages. But what we now know as the DR, the Dominican Republic, was claimed by France in 1795. And for Dessalines, the entire island is Haiti. So to have this rogue French general in what becomes the Dominican Republic claiming that Haiti is not sovereign in this area is a cause for concern for General Dessalines. But at this point, it's the first year of independence. They are busy concentrating on establishing a government for this new post-emancipation society. What breaks the camel's back is this enslavement proclamation that Ferrand issues in 1805. And I always like to pause at this juncture to give a mini little lesson about what is in this enslavement proclamation. So Ferrand identifies Haitian children who are under the age of 14 in 2 categories based on their genders. So Ferrand argues girls under the age of 14 should be kept on the island for military purposes. What does that mean? It means he was conscripting Haitian female children into sexual slavery. For the boys, he has a more clear plan. If you're above the age of 14, you will be shot on sight, because age 14 is, in the 19th century, that was the age that young boys were conscripted into the military. So, for example, Henri Christophe, some of you might know this, he fought in the US Revolution, and at the time, he was a boy of 12. So Ferrand strategically targets the initiation phases of the Haitian military in a way of cutting the revolution in its tracks. I really want to emphasize this thing about children, because they are the first generation of Haitians who do not have the experience of slavery, who do not have the trace of iguaz on their bodies. So when Dessalines launches war against what becomes the Dominican Republic, it is a very violent and brutal war, but unfortunately, he had to retreat back to the western part of the island because they thought that the French were coming to invade. In fact, the French were not coming to invade. They were participating in a strike against Britain. But when you are looking at the Caribbean Sea from the vantage point of Mole Saint Nicolas, you can't exactly tell where a fleet of hundreds of ships are planning on landing. So as soon as they are able to see these boats coming into Haiti, they flee back to protect their borders. But that was not the intent of the French at that time. So I am proposing that we end the Haitian Revolution with Emperor Dessalines' assassination, because it is after the assassination of Dessalines that the American-born men who were leading up until this time, the Africans are no longer an issue. Dessalines is no longer an issue. So in many ways, the economic concerns of the wealthy mixed race men, who were in many ways the first participants of the Haitian Revolution, they're able to take the revolution and use it for their purposes, completely ignoring the African masses. Okay, so this is a document announcing Christophe's war against Pétion. So what launches the war, of course, is precipitated by Dessalines' assassination, but there was a constitutional assembly shortly after his death. And in that constitutional assembly, the mixed race elite, they devise a series of provisions that essentially divorce power of governing the state from the president, presumably Henri Christophe. As soon as Christophe sees this document, he realizes that not only does he not have control over the military, he does not have control over the treasury, he does not have control over education. He realizes that his power is being neutered from the documents, and he immediately launches war against Pétion and his factions. So at this point, I want to give you all some time to read this quote before I begin tying it into Christophe's political imaginary. So I'll give you about 15 seconds to do that. Okay. So as some of my good Haitian Catholics, Haitian Christians, you might recognize this passage from the book of Luke in the Christian Bible. And this is Christophe's approach to Pétion's rebellion. His argument at this time in October 1810 is, we have now defeated a good majority of Pétion's soldiers. Instead of executing them for treason, we're going to incorporate them into the northern militaries and demonstrate to them this principle from Luke of Christian charity. What I love about this document is the final sentence that reads, "Let them reflect that the vessel of independence in which we are all embarked must save itself or perish with the passengers." Outside of this snapshot that I just provided you, Christophe continues on to argue that we're trying to reach a port of safety. Is that port of safety political independence? Is that port of safety equal rights for everyone in Haiti? Is that port of safety diplomatic recognition? The text is not entirely clear, but I simply want us to focus on this idea that in 1810, Henri Christophe, I'm so sorry, someone is not on mute and it's quite distracting. Thank you so much. Yes, so in 1810, October 1810, Christophe has just vanquished part of Pétion's military, and he's making this argument that we need to see ourselves as all embarked on the same vessel. And that to me blew my mind because I am part of the Haitian diaspora that arrived in the US right before the Haitian boat people crisis. So as a young person growing up in Brooklyn, New York, my first introduction to Haiti, outside of the parameters of my household, of course, was this idea that Haitians are boat people. So imagine my thrill in finding one of the fathers of Haitian independence, articulating our unity, but precariousness in a way that gives you purpose as opposed to despair, which is typically what we think about when we hear about the Haitian boat people crisis of the 90s. Okay, so now that we have done a brief introduction of the Haitian independence, Haitian revolution. I'm keeping my eye on the time. I have exactly 11 minutes, so let's just get to it. So as I pointed out in the beginning of my presentation, to understand Christophe's political imaginary, you need to see his understanding of Christianity and his relationships to his sons. Let me see if I can get this slide. Okay. So we'll jump backward. So in 1792, during the first phase of the Haitian Revolution, Christophe's eldest son, Ferdinand Christophe, is born. We often don't hear about Ferdinand because he died in consequence of his father's revolutionary behavior after the father sent him to France. So this is in September 1802, as a show that the Haitian forces would realign themselves with France after Louverture's exile. Christophe voluntarily sends his child to France to be educated. The idea being that once the wars are over, his son will be sent back to Haiti and he will take his rightful position as a member of the Black Jacobins, the Black people who were fighting in the Haitian Revolution. But what we come to find out, Deborah Jensen, she comes to find out that as political events are shifting in Saint-Domingue, the treatment of Christophe's firstborn child is radically changed. So by 1803, when it is no longer possible to work with the French army, in May 1803, we know that our flag is born. Around this same time period, Napoleon decides that Ferdinand should no longer get educated, but he should be transferred into an orphanage way outside of Paris in order to divorce the affection that Black people living in France had for the Haitian revolutionaries, who they saw in the personage of Ferdinand. And at this point, I just want to read directly from Deborah Jensen's book. It's titled Beyond the Slave Narrative, Politics, Sex, and Manuscripts in the Haitian Revolution. It's a fascinating text. Perhaps I will send this presentation to you all, including a brief bibliography if you want to read up some more on the sources that I'm using today. So Jensen writes, "It was impossible to catch a glimpse of him from this time forward," speaking of Ferdinand, "but it is known that they sent him to learn the trade of shoemaking, requiring him to take it up. Christophe continually refused, saying that his father had sent him to France to get a fine education, not to be a cobbler. They told him that he was a little brigand, the son of a bigger brigand who was massacring all the whites in Saint-Domingue. The young adolescent responded in his turn that his father was not a brigand, but a friend of Bonaparte. This response and his obstinate refusal to become a cobbler were the reasons that Christophe was beaten so much that he developed several abscesses, of which he died." Christophe does not know that they have beaten his child to death, but he understands that because of the shift that happened in the Haitian Revolution, that he is likely never going to see that child again. So I just want to point out, so Ferdinand is in France, Henri Christophe has a second born whose son, the one that we more traditionally read about, and he is actually part of this generation of children who are born after the Haitian Revolution who have never experienced slavery. 1 year after this child is born, we have the enslavement proclamation that I mentioned to you all earlier. So I just want you to imagine Ferdinand is beaten to death because his father is a revolutionary in France. And then you have, excuse your faces, a vagabond in the Dominican Republic who is threatening to enslave more Haitian children. Again, Dessalines' army is not successful, and we come to find out that Ferdinand Christophe, he dies sometime in 1805, again because of the blunt force trauma that he received because he refused to work a particular type of job that was beneath the station of his father. So we will just go back to Christophe and how he talks to his children. So I love this letter. So this is 2 years into the kingdom of Christophe. Why does Christophe choose a kingdom? So the Haitian independence comes shortly after the US independence. And one of his ideologues mentioned earlier by Dr. Dutez, Baron de Vate writes that he found it absurd that the Haitian Republic, modeled after the US, would model itself after a nation that had enslaved people. What does it mean for Pétion to have a republic that is modeled on the US that has enslaved people, or a republic in general that was led by Napoleon, who at this point is the largest terrorist on the globe? So keeping those two things in mind, the republic that has enslaved people and the republic that has caused so much confusion in the early 19th century, Christophe decides to reverse his focus and think about the African-born population and where they're coming from. So in the early 19th century, the majority of governments on the western coast of Africa, where Haitians are coming from, they were governed by a monarch. So that's one reason why Christophe chooses the monarchy. The second reason he chooses the monarchy is that, like other Haitian leaders at this time, he's trying to ingratiate Haiti to the British Empire, which is a monarchy. So he wants to strategically think about the people he's governing who are coming from monarchical African governments, while at the same time demonstrating to the monarch of England, that his government is more compatible for Britain than the republic governed by his peer Alexandre Pétion. And finally, oh, I have 3 more minutes. I'm gonna do my best. Okay, so I will give you all a few moments to digest this second letter that Christophe writes to his son. So 30 seconds, and then I'll make my points. Okay, that was 30 seconds. So what this letter teaches us is Christophe is an observant father and demonstrates that fatherhood is a personal priority. He first compliments the son on his penmanship, but immediately he launches into a brutal reprimand of the 9-year-old boy and launches into correcting behaviors reported by the boy's teachers. Victor was recorded as mistreating his servants, and Christophe accuses him of not following, quote, the counsel and advice of those qualified to give them to you. And I want to emphasize that point, those qualified to give it to you. So one of the unknown aspects of Christophe's kingdom is that he heavily invested in teachers from England who could come to the island and educate not only his children and the children of the nobility of the country. He wanted them to be educated in the same innovative ways that their English peers were being educated in England. And this model is known as the Lancaster model of education. And it's pretty much this model of each one teach one. So, ou apprend yon étudiant leçon 1, et puis là, l'apprend même leçon 1 by trois lot étudiants. So he brought this system of education into Haiti, and by 1818, it's a fully formed, thriving education system that is financed directly by the state, which brings up the interesting question, how is the Haitian state financed under Haiti? And I'll leave that for our discussion so that we can get to the less heroic aspects of Christophe's leadership. So in any case, Victor, the poor boy prince, like generations of Haitian children after him, understood the subtext of the sentence that reads, well, I don't know if you'll be able to see this, but I'll just read it out loud. So when a Haitian parent says to you, though I have delayed writing you until now because of the press of affairs, and though I have been unable to return to the capital, I shall not forget to speak to you in person about this the first time I see you, and I shall make you more docile to the council, etc., etc. So, oh no, I lost my place. Yes, every Haitian child in this seminar right now understands the subtext of that quote is this is what he's saying about making his son docile to his teachers. But what is most fascinating about this text are 2 dependent clauses that are just thrown into the sentence that I just gave you. So because of the press of affairs, and though I have been unable to the capital, what is the press of affairs? So I want to direct your attention to the letter again. As all good students of Haitian history know, 17 of October is the anniversary of Dessalines' death. But at this time of Haitian history, Dessalines is not yet seen in the heroic fashion that we now see him. So that is not the significance of this 17 October day. What's significant is the press of affairs between Pétion and Christophe. 1813 is actually the year that all hostilities stopped between Christophe and Pétion. So I just love this letter so much because let's just think about this. So Palais Sans Souci is constructed, completed in 1813. Pétion is now pushed effectively back into Port-au-Prince. And in the midst of all of this, Christophe stops to be a father. And this is such an amazing point to end my presentation on, because there are so many misunderstandings of the Haitian Revolution, of its anti-slavery icons like Christophe, but our ancestor reminds us that no matter what is going on outside, no matter what is going on in our country, it is your duty as a Haitian to parent your children, to father them, and to remind them of their responsibility to the nation. For Victor, this is pressing. You must be able to take the counsel of the people who you seek them out from. So that's major lesson number one. If you are to continue in the tradition of King Henri Christophe, you need to listen to your counselors. You must have counselors. The second thing, which of course was the first thing, is it is very important to teach the next generation anything, full stop. But in our case right now, as we are celebrating the 200th anniversary of Christophe's suicide, and during the Q&A, I'd like for us to talk about what we now know about PTSD as it relates to survivors of the earthquake, and to relate that back to a man like Christophe. This man had been fighting in revolutions from the age of 12, and then a rebellion takes him off of his seat, and he decides to take the bullet as opposed to suffering the same fate as his predecessor. So I will stop here, and I invite us to have conversations about any of the materials that I've presented or any questions that you have in general about Christophe. Thank you all so much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Pierre. That was very informative, illuminating. I feel that what you've given us is a preview of a 3-hour seminar. Definitely going to have you back. All right. First question that came through, they would like you to address the military experience that the Africans came to the island with. Can you speak to that?
Absolutely. So, as we all know, from the 15th century forward, European nations are swallowing African bodies into the colonization experiment. This encourages certain African leaders to both participate and defend their subjects from enslavement. So what we know about the late 19th century is that you have many kingdoms on the west coast of Africa, the Dahomey Kingdom. We have some Muslim kingdoms on the western coast of Africa who are also fighting against each other throughout the 1700s. All of these people develop a keen sense of military experience before the Middle Passage. And once they arrive to Haiti, so excuse me, I don't think I made this point during the formal presentation, but 2/3 of the people who fight in the revolution, they're born in this African context that I'm telling you about. So the likelihood that these people had military experience before arriving on the island is very high. So that's point one of how they got their military experience. But the second way that they got their military experience is from the first phase of the Haitian Revolution, where you have the Spanish government, the French government, and the British government promising them their freedom in exchange for joining European imperial armies. So this is how the Africans received their military training before arriving to Haiti and during the revolution itself. Great question, thank you.
Another question is, could you speak a little bit more about the relationship that Christophe has with Christianity?
Yes, thank you. So Christophe, excuse me, when you examine the proclamations that he gives to his subjects, he always anchors his remarks in some proverb or biblical passage that we, as 21st century Haitians, we would be able to identify. But here's the interesting point that connects directly to the previous question. Most of these people are born in Africa. When did they have time to develop this familiarness with Christianity? So I argue many times when Christophe is talking about Christianity, he's speaking to a very specific sector of the Haitian population that has had some sort of training or understanding of Christianity. When he adopts his national education plan, ooh, hold on, I think I actually have this for you all. Yes, in 1818, when he establishes his national education plan, and I'm going to share my screen. Can I still share my screen? Yes, I can. Awesome. Give me 1 second to get this right. Uh-oh. Too many screens. Okay. Can you all see my screen yet?
No, I can't see it yet.
No, we just see your beautiful face.
Thank you, Viagela. I know that voice anywhere. Okay, in the interest of time, I really want you guys to see this. Yes, victory. So this is actually a copy of Christophe's education plan. It was published in a Haitian newspaper in 1962. Can you all see where my cursor is circling or no?
Yes.
Maybe. Oh, thank you so much, Kahende. So this is published in 1962, and it's simply his education platform. And I won't go into the details of it, but in the education platform that is announced in 1818, and I'll just put this over here. Let me see, can you all see the date yet? No, not yet. But in any case, this is the education plan of Haiti is established in 1818. And as we know, Christophe only governs for 2 years after that. But within that education plan, Christophe is saying anyone who goes to a national school, which is all of the schools in 1818, you will have a proper Christian education. So Christophe is aware that the majority of Haitian subjects do not have a familiar relationship with Christianity. So he puts it into the national schools in order to give them that religious educational training that was denied to Haiti until the 1860s, when the Vatican formally acknowledges Haitian independence. So in other Latin American countries, the Catholic Church was typically responsible for educating the post-colonial masses, but because the Vatican does not recognize Haiti, they do not support Black liberation, they deny Haiti the national education that it provided to other Latin American countries that are Catholic. Thank you for that question.
Mm-hmm. Dr. Pierre, could you talk a little bit about the role of Christophe in the conspiracy against Dessalines and his involvement, whatever it might have been, in the assassination of Caporal Amour?
No, I cannot. And I address it simply in that way because I know that in Haitian lore, this is a very juicy, fascinating detail of it, but I think it obscures the role that foreign nations played in the eventual assassination of Dessalines and the suicide of Christophe. So no, I cannot answer that question. And I encourage us when that story comes up to highlight the types of colonial alliances that I briefly mentioned before. Toussaint versus Rigaud becomes Christophe versus Pétion, and Dessalines, unfortunately, he falls in between those two civil wars, But the dynamics at play with the first Civil War and the second Civil War are what leads directly to Dessalines' assassination. And I'll leave that there.
Okay. Um, Can Dr. Pierre tell us a bit about the counselors to Christophe, whether British, Creole, Africans, or all of the above?
That's a great question. So Christophe, sometime in the 1807, I have found a letter from a letter in relationship to Christophe, where he has told British merchants that if you so happen to have any enslaved Africans, I will purchase those enslaved people. It is not yet clear what it means for Christophe to be buying slaves when he is so clearly anti-slavery. But what we do know of some of those enslaved Africans that Christophe purchases, they become the Royal Dahomets, which are a private security. They are a private security military group that Christophe deliberately selects from new Africans in order to eliminate any of the factionalism that destroyed his predecessor. So the idea is if you have these new immigrant Africans, they're not aligned with the mixed race people in the South. They're not aligned with the Creole born like Pétion. So they are uniquely loyal to Christophe. So the Royal Dahomets, of course, play an important advisory role to Christophe. Now, the two letters that I shared with you all during the formal presentation, that's actually from a correspondence series between Christophe and Thomas Clarkson, one of the leading British abolitionists of the early 19th century. He also receives counsel from William Wilberforce. So all of these teachers that I was telling you about that Christophe is recruiting from England, they are being recommended very highly by both William Wilberforce and Thomas Clarkson. There are a lot of things we can say about the sincerity of Clarkson and Wilberforce, but we do know that they were educators and politicians in England, and they were invested in the anti-slavery nature of Christophe's kingdom. So they wanted to give him as much support as possible. And that came particularly through the teachers that they were sending to Christophe.
Super. Another question. Can you speak more about Christophe's vision of the economy of Haiti as it relates to a monarchy?
So his vision, so the monarchy is nice. Okay, so as I said earlier, he makes this decision in order to make the British realize, look, we have a very similar governing structure. We both believe in anti-slavery. And to his African-born constituents, look, this is a monarchy that is very similar to the monarchies that you migrated from and were kidnapped from in Africa. But when we're thinking about the economy, Christophe is not thinking about the economy in terms of a traditional monarchical economy. What do I mean when I say that? In the 18th, 19th century, monarchies of Europe, they had these mercantilist trade agreements. Mercantilist simply means the colony is bound to trade exclusively with the empire that it belongs to. Christophe, because he is the leader of a sovereign nation, he has no empire in Europe to bind himself to. So he is happy to embrace laissez-faire capitalism as articulated by Adam Smith in 1776. And I just want to bring this point really close home. So Adam Smith is writing in the time of the US Revolution. And those ideas presented by Adam Smith, this is Wealth of Nations, excuse me, Wealth of Nations, published in 1776. It promotes free trade because the more free trade you have, this is the theory of laissez-faire capitalism. Free trade empowers government to protect rights of citizens, right? But with Christophe, he could embrace the idea of free trade because this is the only way that Haiti is able to get the capital it needs to invest in its military, the capital it needs to invest in fortifications that will protect its people. This is also known as economic liberalism. Political liberalism, however, is a tricky subject under a monarchical government. Because in a monarchy, the king is the divinely appointed ruler. So in a monarchy, you cannot make the argument that a republic can, that our citizens are free and equal, because free and equal citizens means no more monarch. So it's a very hybrid political and economic system that Christophe, like his other peers and predecessors, this is what I mean that they're creolizing political theory. We like this idea of liberty, but liberty as it means everyone is equal undermines what we understand as a monarch's power. So he is creolizing the political structures that are available to him, monarchy, and he is also participating in what we now call free trade. And this is one of the aspects of Haitian history that I really want to elevate, particularly because our country, unlike any country I've ever heard of, someone can correct me if I'm wrong, but we have a last name, poorest nation in the Western Hemisphere. In order to get to that, we need to counterbalance it with this clear point. It is the Haitian state that helps break apart the chokehold that Europe had on American colonial economies. The way that they did it was very furtive. It never led to diplomatic recognition, but this is what Christophe had to do in order to finance the vessel of independence.
Super. Another question is, how did Christophe go about building all the different palaces in the country, including the Citadel and Palais Sans Souci?
So on the construction, I had this book right here. It's gone. That's okay. And they're all here somewhere. Christophe, through his British advisors, was able to recruit German architects in the beginning, really in the, I wouldn't say exactly when it begins, but German architecture, Eastern European architecture at this point of history is one of the most quote unquote sublime. So he gets the references to these German architects from his British allies. They get sent over and they provide the blueprints for Palais Sans Souci. However, who is building Palais Sans Souci? It is the African-born majority. And when they are constructing Palais Sans Souci, I actually do want to share this with Dr. Dutez, and he might be able to share this with the participants in general. But there is an archaeologist who currently excavates at Citadel, and he has been able to demonstrate that the building techniques of the Citadel and Palais Sans Souci are directly traceable to African understandings of architecture, even though the blueprints follow an Eastern Europe German model.
I do have the article, so we could definitely, if anybody sent a request for it, we can basically afford it to them. Interesting article. Being someone who have worked in the African continent, East and Central, hence visited the western parts, is the Dahomey the only kingdom mentioned in your research?
No, Dahomey is not the only African state mentioned in my research. So my research, it actually, it covers the entire 4 phases of the revolution that I talked about. But to truly see the African presence in Haiti, you really need to go to Dessalines' kingdom, because that's in fact where, oh snap, I can share it with you all. I love Zoom. I'm sorry, I'm getting excited and I don't want us to go over, but I just want to give you all some examples of some Africans who governed alongside Emperor Dessalines. So, oh, how do I do this? How do I make this into presentation? So this is a presentation from the Haitian Studies Association from a few years ago. But this document is the Imperial Designation Dossier of Dessalines, and it's just announcing it is we, the military of Haiti, that gives Dessalines power, which I think is an interesting pivot from the US example when it says we, the people, but the US has a very funny way of defining people, so I'm not going to belabor that point, but I just want you all to see the African people here. How do I make this present? Can you all see this? No, you can't see this. Give me 1 second. That is a beautiful question about the Africans in my research. Okay, I'm not going to be able to figure out how to press play. But in any case, can you all see where I'm sorry?
Hit slideshow.
5-2.
Hit slideshow and then hit play.
Where's slideshow? Thank you so much, James. Where's slideshow? That's what I'm looking for.
Right where your mouse is.
Oh, thank you. Hold on a second. Let me just slideshow. There we go. Thank you so much, James. Play from current slide. That was, I'm not going to be able to do it. It's making me flustered. Thank you so much though, James. So over here, we have this name, Goma. So we all know who Goma is. He's one of the Maroons that was based in Jérémie. And here we have him as listed as one of the generals who gives Dessalines authority to govern. So this is Goma. Let me go. Okay. So here is, this is kind of funny, but this man signs his name on this document as Macaque. As Haitians, we all know that means monkey. However, Macaque is actually a Central African word. Ma is a prefix. So when we think of a person like Macandal, what's the other word? Macaya, Macaque. That M, that ma suffix is a Central African suffix. So whenever you hear these words in Haitian language, just immediately know that this is coming from Central African languages. And Macaque, even though that might have been a name he used as a joke or as a way of just saying, this is the name that I have and I'm gonna keep it. But last slide on this point. So Gilles Bambara is one of the prominently known ethnic groups that migrate from Africa, having prior military experience. So the fact that this man signs his name as Gilles Bambara, it is a concrete connection between Africa and Dessalines' administration as opposed to Christophe's administration. So I know that we're running short on time, so I'll just stop on that point here.
All right. There's an issue looking at Christophe's attitude toward voodoo and what impact, if any, did it have on his governance?
That's a very good question. So Christophe is known to have put laws in the Code Henri and his constitutions that specifically bans voodoo. So these bans on voodoo, I want us to try at least to take any 21st century stereotypes that we have about voodoo while we're thinking about this point, connecting Christophe to voodoo. So in 19th century Haiti, a practitioner of voodoo simply meant an African-born person. So when we think about the laws that are being perpetrated against voodoo practitioners, it is a way of silencing the African-born majority's power. Because one of the things that, what's her name? Rachel Dominique Beauvoir points out in her work is that the Bois Caïman Congress, it is a religious meeting that becomes a political decision that ultimately leads to a military campaign against slavery, imperialism, and racism. So when we're thinking about the religious traditions of our ancestors, we want to think about, one, these sites are, without the Bois Caïman Congress, there would be no conversation about a Haitian revolution. Point one. Point two, in the early 19th century, we saw that Christophe assassinated Sans Souci. We saw that there was a period of eliminating African-born authority. And in the early 19th century, whenever you see laws against voodoo, it's not necessarily the practices of what we now know as voodooism. It's more so a clear identification marker that you are African, and an understanding that it is a religious meeting that launched the Haitian Revolution. So early Haitian leaders, they're scared of voodoo, again, not because of the 21st century understandings of it, but because they do not want this religious space to generate the same type of Haitian leadership that Bois Caïman had in the launching of the Haitian Revolution. That's a great question. Thank you.
What aspect of Christophe ideology could inspire today's Haitians to pull their country out of poverty and enter progress and self-determination?
Okay, this is going to sound absolutely insane because we are in an election season where the term law and order is a dog whistle for the Republican Party. But that is the major gift that I think Christophe's governance has to contemporary Haitian leaders: law and order. So Christophe's laws, these are not two-page documents. They're hundreds and hundreds of pages dictating so many different aspects of Haitian life and enforcing it through the military. Now, when we're thinking about the relationship between the Haitian military and Haitian independence, to me, it has never made sense for Haiti to not have a military. Pause, I understand that the Duvalier dictatorship abused the military against the people, but it is the military that gave Haiti its independence. Christophe attempted to create laws that would gradually phase out military leadership into civil society leadership. But unfortunately, his tenure ends, one, in response to how rigorously he policed his people. Many people, so the rebellion, and I just want to put this point out there, it is not Boyer who defeats Christophe. It is a rebellion against Christophe's rigidity that leads to an uprising that would then be capitalized upon by President Boyer. But the rebellion itself is again a reminder that Haitian leaders often did not govern with the vantage point of the African-born majority. However, we need to always remember that the French Empire, the British Empire, they are, in the words of Christophe, watching Haiti like greedy vultures. So my question in response to that question is, do you sacrifice the rights of your people in order to maintain political independence? And I think this is a conflict that over time we will see replicate itself in the Caribbean. on the African continent? What is the relationship between securing independence and preserving rights? This is the central issue, that Christophe dealt with, that other leaders in the African diaspora continue to deal with.
All right. Question that I have, could you talk about the relationship between the different classes in the monarchy or in the republic under Christophe?
That's a great question. So class formation really begins during what I've called let me see if I can do this again, if I can try to share my screen with you all, just so that we can see where it is that I'm talking about. Share screen. Yes, we can. Okay, so class formation begins in Haiti during what I'm calling the second phase of the Haitian Revolution. So these Black generals, whether they're African-born or Creole-born, they begin to buy the abandoned properties of French planters who have been fleeing the island. So men like Dessalines, who were definitely enslaved before the revolution, they are escaping out of the enslaved class into an elite class during the 12 years of the revolution. But this creates tension with the mixed race men who had property before the revolution even began. And based on their understanding and application of the Enlightenment, they saw themselves as the best suited to lead Haiti. But now you have two elite groups that fought in the Haitian Revolution who are now elite members of society. Some people have argued that part of the reason that Dessalines is assassinated is he had a redistribution of the land plan for people of African descent, because he saw this consolidation of African-born and American-born class interests above that of the African-born. Once we get into the Haitian kingdom proper, or the Haitian Republic proper, there is no destabilization of these class categories that I just talked about. So Michel Roth-Trio, I mentioned him again. I mentioned him before. He makes the compelling argument that after 1806, it is Haitian state against the nation. And this is how Haiti develops as a fractured nation state from the 19th century, frankly, until the first US occupation in the early 20th century. So that's how I would consider class as it relates to Haitian governance. Before the kingdom is created, before the republic is created, there's a consolidation of class interest against national interest.
Very good. There is a reflection there somebody's pondering. Somebody finds it odd that Christophe hired Englishmen to teach his children, and himself wants them to be docile. And the comment the person is making is that this is a tradition that is still perpetuating. And people are wondering, is that part of the problem that we have within the society itself that has kept us backward?
So in the same way that I could not and would not engage the Dessalines conspiracy theory, I cannot address the second part of the reflection in that, is there a direct pathology of sorts in the way that I was hearing what you were saying that connects 19th century Haiti to 21st century Haiti? That is beyond my expertise as a 19th century historian. And it is against my politics as someone who wants to support Haitian efforts at self-governance, no matter how many times we fail. I think the joy for me, oh, what an odd sentence, Dr. Pierre. The joy for me is to excavate the lessons that we can learn in the failures of early 19th century Haitian leaders. Christophe, for example, he was simply too strict. He was too strict. Many African-born people felt that their living experience was not that different from when they were enslaved. So under a leader like Christophe, who is highly invested in getting British recognition, and in order to get British recognition, Haitians have to aggressively produce coffee and sugar. How do you aggressively produce coffee and sugar? You militarize all of the plantations and you treat the people in the same way that they were treated prior to the revolution. This is a failure, yes, but again, how would he have been able to elicit British help if he were not selling Haitian coffee, Haitian sugar? And one final point about why Christophe would recruit English people to educate his sons. So as we know, Christophe is born in Grenada, and in the time that he was born, Grenada was a British colony. So many people have argued that Christophe likely spoke English before he became a servant at a very popular hotel somewhere in the northern province. So he's born in an English territory. He sees himself as a monarch slightly aligned with the English tradition. And Christophe, unlike the other leaders of the time, he could clearly see that the contest between England and France, England was going to be the victor. So keeping that in mind, I want to begin aligning myself with the British Empire as early as possible through the education of my sons, through the national education plan for my national children.
How are we doing on time? I do have a question here that we can close with, depending on where we are with the time. All right, I'll go back to my question. How can Haitians carry Christophe's legacy in today's realities? I think you alluded to that in one of your answers.
Yes. I think this idea of Haitians are the fathers, right? No, let me start that sentence again. The Haitian state can be seen as the father of Black nationalism. So Haiti is the first independent Black state in the modern era. So the things that happen in Haiti inform all Black states that come after it. It continues to inform Black states to this day. Part of the reason that we're quote unquote poorest in the Western Hemisphere is that we were punished for our revolutionary independence, but it was still worth it. When we think about what Christophe and Dessalines did in that enslavement proclamation period, we are going to launch another war 1 year after a 13-year war to protect our children. So Dr. Dutesse, my question in response to your question is, what the lessons we can learn from Christophe is to answer, what are we willing to do for the Haitian children, whether here or at home?
Very good. I have one answer: education. Another question: could you talk about the duplicitous relationship between the monarchy and England? On the surface, England seems to support the monarchy, and at other instances, England clearly worked to undermine the monarchy.
So this is a good time to disaggregate what we mean by England, right? So you have English government, British government, because they have Irish people and Scottish people who are in British government. That is the formal stratum of British government. Formal British government is never in conversation with any of the Haitis. I want to reemphasize that point. Formal British government is never in conversation with any of the Haitis. However, there are British subjects who work in Jamaica who buy Haitian sugar and Haitian coffee, and they falsely represent themselves as being members of British government. So you have these, and I actually have one of my published articles, I'll share it with you, Dr. Dutes. You have these various British subjects saying, hey, Christophe, hey, Dessalines, hey, Pétion, if you give me this sugar at a discounted price, I double promise I will bring the case of recognition before George III. So they're just taking all of this trade, pretending that they can support Haiti, but they're actually just participating in that free trade commerce that I was talking about earlier. A little point to emphasize here, by the 1840s, Haiti is producing 40% of the globe's coffee without diplomatic recognition. So all of these men who have been telling Haitian leaders, from Dessalines, Christophe, Pétion, that we have access to the British government, though they're not doing their lobbying job effectively, they are successfully circulating Haitian coffee around the globe through secret deals. Now, the other English who seem to support Haiti, of course, are Clarkson and Wilberforce, who I spoke about earlier. The British abolished the transatlantic traffic in Africans. We typically know that as the transatlantic slave trade, but I like to be very clear about what we're talking about. We're talking about humans, so we're gonna call it the transatlantic traffic in Africans. The British abolished that trade, and Christophe tries to make the argument unsuccessfully that Britain, you should support us because we are both anti-slavery in a world that has enslaved subjects. And this is where Christophe is actually being very shrewd. He's very aware that the British still have slavery, but he is making a difficult decision. He is very aware that when he makes these arguments about anti-slavery, the people receiving his messages may be behaving in a duplicitous manner, to use Dr. Dutes's words. But again, what are his options? And I'll stop there.
Thank you very, very much, Dr. Pierre, for your generosity, the excitement that you bring to the subject, your dynamism, and for a presentation that I found both informative, illuminating, and enlightening. I cannot wait to have you back. As I said, this is a preview for a 3-hour seminar. Can't wait to have you back. Well, guys, I cede the screen to the next person. Well, I see the picture of our chairperson. Mike?
Thank you, Dr. Dutes. At this time, as part of our presentation, I would ask Dr. Pierre, do you mind briefly introduce Ms. Harmony Divine for us? And so that we'll be able to sing. I think that would be more appropriate to do. Thank you.
I would be absolutely thrilled to introduce Harmony. So Harmony Divine is a freshman at Georgia State University right now. She was she was the youngest member of the committee for Vendredi en Bâtonnel, which is a weekly forum based in New York that gives Haitians in our community an opportunity to talk to each other, to learn from each other. And Harmony's input in Vendredi en Bâtonnel was extraordinary and visionary in the way of our ancestors. And one of the major gifts that we have received during the period of COVID-19 is this ability to connect on Zoom and the ability to connect on the telephone. So at our weekly Vendredi en Bâtonnel meetings, Harmony would always begin our meeting singing her rendition of the national hymn, And Harmony, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Natalie. Ms. Pierre, I really appreciate that introduction. Give me one second. So this is what I usually do during the pandemic. We have our the ambassador call, and yeah, I'm the one that sings the national anthem so that we can start the meeting. And I'm here today to sing it for you guys. Okay, thank you. Pour Haïti, nan nos ancêtres, yo c'est pour marcher, mais nan la mer. Nan mi tan nan pa fait pour gen traite, nous fait pour m'sel met tête, nous en nous marcher, mais non la mer pour Haïti, Kavin pi belle. En nous, mes têtes ensemble. Pour Haïti, nan tous ancêtres, yo nous gon drapeau, tant que tout peuple, yo c'est pour nous remel, mourir pour lui. C'est pas cadeau blanc, te fait nous, c'est sans ancêtres, nous, yo qui t'a coulé. Pour nous, Kembe drapeau, nous, c'est pour un travail, mettez ensemble. Pour l'autre pays, qu'à respecter. Drapeau, si là, c'est nom tout haïtien pour Haïti. Non, nos ancêtres, yo, c'est pour s'éclairer, c'est pour planter. C'est notre toute force nous chita, c'est ligue by nous manger, en habite, en voye ou à qui content, faut abaye. C'est clair, vous êtes femme ou garçon. Pour nous vivre avec celle force pour nous pour Haïti, dans nos ancêtres, yo faut que nous capables, voyant garçon ak femme voyant, monde parfait pour être avec moun. C'est ça que fait tout maman, tout papa, doit voyer ti moun yo l'école pour yo apprendre. Pour yo connaître, ça Cécile, Toussaint, Dessalines, Toya. Te fait pour être nègre en bas côte blanc. Thank you.
Thank you very much for taking the time to share your talent with us, all for this moving rendition. Come on, guys, could we unmute? Maybe we can see your hands. Can we see some hands?
Oh my gosh.
Harmony.
Thank you, Dr. Pierre.
Thank you.
Harmony, thank you so much.
And I wish you luck in your studies. If the society can help in any way, let us know. If I can help in any way, let me know. Okay. All right.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Very welcome.
Yes, Harmony, thank you so much for this very well sound and rendition of our national anthem. Thank you and thank you. At this time, we would like to ask the audience for about a minute or two of their time so we could just do a brief survey. So the survey is up. It's going to be up for about 2 minutes. We just kind of need your feedback on it. It's a few questions. Please take your time at this time and answer the questions. And it's about we're going to take about 2-3 minutes to do this. Please, it should be on your screen right now. Please go ahead and do the survey. And if you do not see it, there is a poll button on your screen. Just pull that and you should be able to complete the survey. Please do that right now. just a few more, about maybe 30 seconds more, we will end the survey. Thank you for your patience. And this is very valuable feedback from you, so that way we could certainly improve. This is our first event. We certainly want that feedback, so that way we could adjust accordingly and provide better services to you. It is very valuable to us. We thank you in advance for your time. About now, 78%, 26 of 33 people have completed the survey. And please mute yourself. Okay.
Thank you again for your valuable input and for your participation, but do not go yet. And now I am going to cede the screen to Dr. Marie-Ignace Gauthier-Morel, who will offer the closing comments.
Right before that, do you mind, we will be ending the survey right now. Thank you.
Oh, I'm sorry, I jumped the gun.
Good afternoon, everyone. I am Marie-Ignace Morel. I'm one of, can I talk?
Yeah, please go ahead.
Yes, I'm one of the members of the board of Louverture Cultural Society, known as LCS. We really want to thank all of you for attending our first event. And I just want to congratulate Dr. Natalie Pierre that she kept me suffer from ADHD right there, listening to everything. Your presentation was informative, touching, and really, really just what we needed to start our first event. And I also want to congratulate Harmony for such a wonderful rendition in Creole of our national anthem. It really almost brought tears to my eyes listening to you. And I wish you the best in your studies. And as Dr. Dutesse already said, if we can ever push you through, do something to make young Haitian girls like you, who probably were not born in Haiti, love Haiti and want to do this, it's just inspiring. And that's what we inspire to do with this society, so we can have, young people like you and Dr. Pierre, of course, young Dr. Pierre, teach us who don't know a lot about our country, but I'll get to that. The Louverture Cultural Society is a nonprofit organization, and we our ideas is to inspire and educate to keep our heritage and our culture abreast, so all of us can enjoy it. We are not funded by any grant. All the presentation, all journals, or whatever we do are from donation and memberships. Donation from our board and our friends, and also membership. We want to invite all of you, if I don't know where you all are, although we are in West Palm Beach, but now with virtual, you can be wherever and you can be member of LCS in West Palm Beach. So therefore, we want to invite all of you to join us as members, because I feel like if we have all this diversity of people, we will have a big pool of talents that will inspire us to share, to learn about this great culture that we have inherited from our forefathers, and most of all are not even aware. We don't know much about it. I learned so much today about this whole independence war and what was going on. I go to Cap Haitien every year, and I go to the Citadel, and it's beautiful and all that, and I don't know anything really a lot about it. So I'm very happy to have learned so much. And perhaps when I retire and have more time, I could read all those articles Dr. Pierre has written and all those books that she's going to send us as bibliography. Anyway, so what we're saying is that we're very interested in seeing that if some of you can join us, you can join us by going to our website, and you could see, fill out your membership, and if you're not really yet committed to joining us, you can donate to our next event. Our next event will be on Wednesday, November 18 at 7 p.m., a historic date. We chose that date because that's the date we all know, Bataille de Vertières. It's going to be a great conversation by Dr. Richard and Dr. Dutesse on November 18. Another occasion to learn about our country, about our forefathers, and what brought them, what made Haiti what did Dr. Pierre say, the leader of I don't remember exactly what you said, but that made Haiti become the one that opened the door, the gate of freedom. All right, so please register. We will be sending you the links to the Eventbrite and very soon, so you can register for this upcoming event. Okay, now 2020 has been a very challenging year for us, and as you all know, the things that are in our mind now as Americans, Haitian Americans, is the election and the pandemic of COVID-19. We'll start with the election. As you all know, election date is November 3rd. We are not going to tell you who to vote for, but because we are Haitians, we're immigrants, and we're Black, most of us, and some of us have are not necessarily Haitians, but we have immigrants in our family. We have so many things are on the ballot. So we are encouraging you to vote. Most states have vote by mail, vote early. Early voting has already started in Florida. It has started today in New York, as far as I know. So we are encouraging you to vote, because just like the Haitians had to fight for their freedom, our forefathers here had to fight and die for this privilege to vote. So make your voice count. Please vote. Think about why you're voting. Vote as if you're alive, your life, the lives of your grandchildren, your children, your parents depend on it. And so we, go vote early, vote late, vote by mail, vote on the 3rd, vote. Take somebody with you to vote. So the next thing I'm going to talk about is, of course, you're going to vote, but you're also going to be safe voting. You're going to vote safely. And what I want to tell you all is to follow the guidelines set up by the CDC. There has been a lot of misconception, people telling you about that this COVID-19 is not real. We know people of color are the one that have the biggest morbidity and mortality with COVID-19. So we should really follow the guidelines that's set up by the scientists of the CDC. Wear your mask when you're in public, wear your mask when you are with people that you do not know, practice social distancing, avoid large gathering, and wash your hand. It's simple, it's very simple. So we really want to thank you for participating with us in our first webinar. I know I'm very happy of what I've learned, and I'm sure everybody is also very enthusiastic about this first webinar. I'm already looking forward to the second one, and I know it's going to be as great as this one. So we want to thank you for participating with us. We want to invite you to join us again in the near future, and of course try to become a member so you can be part of us, and so we can learn from each other, enrich us with your knowledge. Stay safe, be safe. See you on November 18th.
Thank you all for your participation. We look forward to seeing you at our next event. Thank you, Dr. Pierre. Thank you, Harmony. Thank you to LCS Board of Directors and to all of you